In the small town where the river wore a silver ribbon at dusk and the bakery always smelled like warm cinnamon, there lived a boy named Kabir in a yellow house with a rusted wind chime. The chime tinkled whenever the breeze remembered it, a shy little sound that hardly disturbed the afternoon nap of the neighborhood cat. Kabir liked to sit by the window where the light made puddles on the floorboards, but most days he watched those puddles shrink without moving from his spot. He believed he was the sort of boy who wasn't good at anything, not at running swift like the boys who played football, not at drawing like Mira who could trap sunsets on paper, not at sums like Vic who did them before the teacher finished reading the problem out loud. Every small stumble felt like a loud announcement that he shouldn't try, and every quiet success, when it came at all, slipped away before he could touch it. So Kabir stopped trying in loud and quiet ways. He stopped raising his hand. He left pages blank because lines looked like cliffs. He let the wind steal his kite string because it seemed the wind wanted it more. When Mom brought out his favorite sketchbook and set it beside his breakfast, he put the butter knife on top of it, as if keeping the book from flying open was important work. Mom had a soft way of moving in the kitchen, like a whisper you could taste. Every morning she warmed milk in a small pot with a blue flower on its side and added a spoonful of sugar that chimed against the rim like a tiny bell. She would carry the cup to Kabir and ruffle his hair, saying, "For a sweet morning, sweetheart." He would smile because it felt like a kind thing to do, then stare at the milk until the top cooled into a thin skin he blew aside with a sigh. The milk tasted sweet, he hardly noticed. Dad came home late most evenings, smelling like sawdust and lake wind. He made furniture in a workshop with big windows and liked to say wood had its own heartbeat. He didn't say much when he walked in except, "How's my river?" and Kabir would answer with a shrug, because what could a boy who wasn't good at anything be but a quiet river, almost still? Sometimes Dad would stand by the window and watch the wind chime, as if he was waiting for a secret. One Tuesday that felt like it forgot how to be a good day, Kabir came home with his lips pressed tight. He dropped his lunchbox and the food had scattered like coins. Later, at art time, his paint had turned to brown mud because he kept stirring all the colors together. Football practice, he tripped over his own foot and the ball kept going as if it no longer needed players. "I'm not made for any of this," he told his shoes on the walk home. "If I stop trying altogether, maybe the world will stop tripping me." He sat at the window again, and the river made its silver ribbon as always, sparkling like a promise he didn't trust. Mom kissed the top of his head and Hummingbird hummed about dinner while Dad leaned against the doorframe, listening without words. That night, Kabir pretended to sleep early, hiding under his blanket like the world was a bright lamp and he was the shade. The next morning, something small and forever changed without making a sound. Mom tied her hair with a green ribbon and looked at Dad across the kitchen. He nodded, as if the wind chime had finally said what it wanted. When Kabir shuffled in with the heavy steps of a boy carrying invisible stones, it was Dad who stood at the stove. He turned with a cup in his hand and a wooden spoon tucked behind his ear like a pencil. "For a sweet morning," he said, copying Mom's voice but making it lower and funny. Kabir managed a crooked smile and took the cup. He sipped. His eyebrows pinched together. "Dad," he said in that serious way that made him sound older, "there's no sugar." tastes so bland. Mom always adds sugar. Dad raised one eyebrow as if it had just thought of something clever. Are you sure? He asked. Maybe try stirring. He tapped the wooden spoon against the rim, and it answered with a soft clink. Kabir frowned but did as told. He dipped the spoon and found the bottom feeling sandy. He stirred slowly. The sound was soft, milk shushing, spoon whispering. As he stirred, the milk changed from heavy to silken. He lifted the cup and took a cautious sip. Sweetness unfolded on his tongue like a surprise he wanted to keep. His eyes widened, the kind of bright that made Mom pause at the sink and turn around. It was there all along, Dad said gently. The sweetness at the bottom. You needed a spoon. You needed to stir. Kabir blinked, as if something inside had just woken up from a long nap. So you put sugar, but you didn't mix it? Dad nodded. Some things don't show themselves until we move. Life is like that. Your talents are like the sugar, perhaps quiet, sitting patiently at the bottom. Fert is your spoon. Stir and the sweetness rises. Kabir set the cup down carefully, as if it contained a secret he didn't want to spill. But what if I stir and there's nothing there? That's fear talking, Dad said, and he set the spoon in Kabir's hand, closing his own warm, big hand over it. Even fear can be red until it dissolves. And maybe, he added, eyes kind, what you find is not what you expect. Maybe your sweetness is music or kindness that others feel safe with, or the patience to grow things. Maybe it's 10 things that look like one. Mom dried her hands and came over, flicking a light kiss on Kabir's forehead. Your father has just invented the philosophy of milk, she said. Please write it in your homework. She winked, and the world tilted toward nice again. That night, Kabir slept under a sky that was suddenly friendlier. He dreamed he was floating in a dark blue bowl of milk that stretched to the edges of everything. A silver spoon big as a rowboat appeared, and when he dipped it into the night, stars rose like sugar crystals. He stirred and stirred. The Milky Way swirled into a bright ribbon, and comets made caramel streaks as they passed. He could hear music in the stirring, soft at first like the wind chime and then fuller as if galaxies had instruments. He woke with the taste of sweetness in his mouth and a feeling like there was warm light tucked under his ribs. The next day, the world didn't suddenly become easy. The football still had a mind of its own. His sketch still looked like a universe of brown. But every time he felt the old gray blanket of not good at anything start to rise, he whispered, "Stir," and tried again. He looked longer at things. He listened harder. He let time pass without scolding it. After school, Mira ran up with her ink-stained fingers. Kabir, we're planting beans today in the school garden. Come help. I'm not good at plants, he said out of habit. That's not a thing, Mira answered, hair falling into her eyes. Plants are good at being plants. We're just their friends. She pulled him along anyway. In the garden, the soil was soft and smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Miss Alia, their teacher, handed Kabir a packet of scarlet runner beans and a small trowel with a blue handle. 2 knuckles deep, 10 centimeters apart, she said. And talk to them. Plants grow taller when somebody believes in them. Kabir made holes that looked more like guesses. He dropped beans like little moons into their craters and covered them with earth, patting each spot twice because it felt courteous. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and, feeling silly, whispered, "Grow, please." The breeze lifted a strand of his hair the way a friend might lift your chin. He smiled, small but real. On the way home, he passed Mr. D'Souza's workshop. The old carpenter was humming while sanding a chair leg that had a carved vine running up it. Sawdust floated in the light like gold snow. Kabir paused at the door. "Ah, Kabir." Mr. D'Souza said without looking up, as if he had eyes in his hands. "Come see how a vine is coaxed from a stick." He pushed a piece of wood toward Kabir and handed him sandpaper. Gentle circles. Not too hard. Stir the surface until it becomes smooth. Stir, Kabir repeated, and both men laughed. He sanded carefully, watching the wood bloom from dull to soft shining. The circles felt like calming a small animal. He stayed longer than he meant to, and when he left, Mr. D'Souza gave him a little wooden spoon he'd carved. "For tea," he said with a wink, "or for remembering." At dinner, Dad pulled a glass jar from the cupboard. "This," he announced, "is the effort jar." He showed Kabir a small bowl of sugar cubes. "Tonight, every 10 minutes you spend trying, really trying, even if the result is messy, you put 1 cube into the jar. When the jar is full, we'll make something sweet together." Kabir looked at the cubes, each like a tiny snow building. "What if it takes forever?" "Forever is only a string of nights," Dad said. "We'll make bracelets of them." That evening, Kabir set a timer and practiced throwing a tennis ball against the wall and catching it. The ball popped out of his hands more often than not, bouncing under the sofa where it gathered secrets. He reached in, rescued it, tried again. 10 minutes passed. He dropped a sugar cube into the jar, and the small clink was the sound of a tiny parade inside his chest. He drew circles, imperfect ones that looked like eggs, and then again a little steadier. Another cube. He practiced whistling for 5 minutes and sounded like a frightened kettle. No cube that time because he'd promised himself 10 minutes. He laughed and set the timer again. A week folded itself into the jar. The beans sent green commas up through the soil. Kabir found he liked mornings best, when the world was still yawning and the light made promises. He poked his head out of the door, greeted the day, and practiced one small thing before school: palm a coin, tie a knot, trace a straight line using patience rather than a ruler. He began to recognize the way effort felt in his body, sometimes like footstep warmth, sometimes like gentle ache. He didn't love every practice, but he loved the moment a little sweetness rose. One afternoon, when Kabir went to fetch the football for practice, the neighborhood cat followed, Pickle, who belonged to everyone and no one. A gust of wind caught Kabir's cap and flung it into the branches of a banyan tree near the field. He thought of climbing, then stopped. He had a choice now: sigh and accept a bare head or stir. He found a long bamboo stick behind the shed, taped a small hook to the end, and tried once, twice, 3 times to catch the cap strap. On the 4th try, the hook caught it cleanly, and the cap slid down the pole into his hands like an apple from a generous tree. He looked around for someone to cheer, then laughed at himself and whispered, "Good stirring." At school, a banner went up: Autumn Fair in 2 weeks. Make something that shows how something works. Kabir's stomach dropped. Words like make and show were rocks in his pockets. At her class, Ms. Alia approached him gently. "I hope you'll bring something," she said. "You notice things other kids miss." "Like what?" he asked, not because he wanted to argue, but because he couldn't find any such things himself. "You listen to how rain hits the windows," she said. "And you know when Pickle's about to jump on my desk because you can read his whiskers." She smiled. "Consider a project about sound. Or about patience." Kabir told Dad about the fair that evening, words piling on each other. Dad listened and then led him to the workshop. "Sound, you say?" He rummaged and came up with a box of odds and ends glass bottles, different lengths of copper pipe, seashells, a stick of chalk. "Measure. Listen. Stir until it sings." They lined glass bottles in a neat row and filled them with different amounts of water. Dad showed him how tapping a bottle changed its voice as the water rose. Kabir's hands learned to pour without splashing. He wrote numbers on the bottles and puffed his cheeks when he tapped because the notes tickled. Then they tried the copper pipes, cutting them to different lengths, stringing them like a curtain. The first time they hung the chimes, it sounded like a shed falling apart in a musical way. Kabir frowned. They measured again, this time more carefully. He stayed past dinner, past bedtime. The jar got 2 cubes. His fingers got a new kind of sore. "Stir," he told the pipes, tapping and listening. He began to hear intervals, the way a deep note and a high one made a space between them that felt like a window. On the way to school the next morning, he saw Mr. D'Souza standing in the lane looking worried. "What is it?" Kabir asked, adjusting his backpack as if it might help. My tiny bird, the old man said, pointing to the open window. The canary flew out and is frightened. She is somewhere in the mango tree. He wrung his hands. I am all thumbs today. Kabir went to the tree and stood very still, the way you do when a new animal is deciding if you are a friend. He listened. The neighborhood was morning busy. Scooters, a silly car alarm someone couldn't shut off, distant laughter, but under it there was a thread of sound, small and bright. There, he said softly, spotting a flash of yellow. He walked a crescent around the tree rather than straight at it. He didn't climb. Instead, he took a small bag of sesame from his pocket. Mom made sure he carried snacks because she knew his hunger was sneaky, and sprinkled a thin trail to an open cage on the ground. He backed away and waited. Waiting felt like stirring a pot you couldn't touch. After a long, patient minute, the bird followed the little moons of sesame, hopped into the cage as if she had decided to forgive the sky, and Kabir gently closed it. Mr. D'Souza clapped his hands once, hard in his eyes. Not good at anything, he said, and Kabir flushed, then grinned. The night before the fair, the sky brewed a tantrum. Wind hustled the clouds around, and rain drummed on rooftops like a group of children practicing loudly but trying. Kabir and Dad carried the wind chimes, the glass bottle xylophone, and a poster that said how sound works when you stir air. They secured the chimes with ropes that Dad taught Kabir to knot square, clove, bowline. Knots are promises you make with string, Dad said. Thunder admired that line and answered from far away. In the morning, the school courtyard shivered with excitement and puddles. Dolls bloomed under canvas canopies. Mira's booth was a painting carousel where you could spin a card and drip colors to make a galaxy. Vic had a lever that could lift a heavy bucket with 2 fingers. Kabir's booth looked like a tiny orchestra had wandered into a science classroom. He arranged the glass bottles in a neat curve, hung the copper pipes so each had enough breathing space, and set a simple sign that read "Touch kindly." Listen closely. Chimes, newly measured and polished, made a sound like rain deciding it loved rooftops. First, children passed without stopping. Kabir felt the old weight tug at his shoulder. He breathed. He stirred the air with a gentle shake of the chimes. The notes chimed, then layered as if taking each other's hands. A small child ducked under the rope and tapped a bottle with 1 finger. He giggled when it rang pure. Others gathered. Kabir began to explain, not with the crisp words of a teacher but with the soft curiosity of someone still learning. This bottle is lower because it has less water, more room to vibrate, see? If I fill it more, hear how it climbs? It's like steps. He clinked, and the bottle said ding 1 floor higher. He showed how a shorter copper pipe made a brighter sound, and how striking near the end made the note wobble. He had to say "touch kindly" 100 times in a kind voice, and he did because he felt like the notes were friends who trusted him. Miss Alia watched from the path, her eyes shining the way they did when she discovered a new book. "This," she whispered to the principal, "is Kabir's sweetness." Midday brought a wind that tugged at canopies and made posters wag. One of Kabir's ropes slipped. The chime wild swung and knocked against the poster. A few pipes fell, clattering like spilled laughter. For a second, the old script tried to write itself. "See, you can't keep things together, Kabir." He caught the rope, whirled a knot into it with hands that had practiced in good light and bad, and tethered the chimes strong. Mira and Vic were suddenly at his side, scooping up pipes. "We've got you," Mira said, smearing a streak of blue on his wrist by mistake. He didn't mind. He rehung the pipes, tapped, listened, adjusted. The chimes steadied. The music returned, less flashy and more sure. By the end of the day, a line of smudgy fingerprints ran along the bottom of his poster like a row of gentle signatures. A small boy with hair that wouldn't obey gravity tugged Kabir's shirt. "Sometimes," he confessed, eyes big, "my homework is like a bottle with no sound. How do I make it sing?" Kabir looked at the boy's hopeful face and, remembering the spoon, knelt to his height. "Stir," he said. "Try, then rest and try again. 10 minutes at a time. The sweetness might be waiting at the bottom of the page." The boy nodded as if he'd just finished a very good sandwich. There were ribbons at the end of the fair: best design, best explanation, most colorful. Kabir's booth won none of those. Instead, Ms. Alia came over with a blue badge that said "Most Curious Project." "For asking questions that asked for more questions," she said. She pinned it on Kabir's shirt, and he felt the badge like a small sun warming a little circle of him and everything near. That evening, the town exhaled the fair's happy noise. Lanterns winked along the river, and the wind chime at home sang to the tired stars. Mom set out dinner, and the house swelled with the smell of tadka and roasted vegetables. Dad reached into the cupboard and brought down the effort jar. It was full to the brim, a glittering square mountain. "Time to make the sweetness," Dad said. They melted butter in a pan and watched it turn from shy yellow to brave brown. They added sugar, which sighed and melted, and then roasted semolina until the kitchen smelled like a happy festival. Stirring was the heart of it, slow, patient circles that invited flavor to wake. Kabir took the wooden spoon and stirred steadily. The spoon felt like a baton calling music from the ingredients. He thought of the jar, of each cube standing for 10 minutes when trying had felt like pushing a bicycle up a hill. He thought of sound and rain and birds and mango trees that learned to trust the ground again. After dinner, Dad warmed milk in the blue-flowered pot. He added sugar and stood for a beat, holding the spoon. Then, like the morning that had turned the world a tiny bit, he set the cup before Kabir and said nothing. Kabir smiled and picked up the spoon without being told. He dipped to the bottom, stirred, and watched the milk change under his hand. He took a sip. The sweetness came home. It's sweet because I stirred, he said, not boasting, just naming a true thing. Dad set his palm on the table, a quiet clap. And because there was sugar, he added. And because you believed and because you practiced. Each of these is a kind of sweetness. Kabir looked at Mom, who was watching with the look she saved for fireflies. If every day is a cup of milk, he said slowly, trying out the words as if they were shoes, then I can stir the bottom of it. I can stir even when I can't see the sugar. Mom tucked a curl behind his ear. Yes, my love. And sometimes, she said, tapping his chest with a gentle knuckle, the sugar is you. That night, Kabir stood at the window and watched the river draw its silver ribbon once more. The wind chime gave a sleepy tingle. He took the small wooden spoon Mr. D'Souza had given him and, grinning at himself, stirred the air in front of him as if it were a cup of night. In his mind, stars lifted like sugar crystals again. He imagined a future where mornings smelled like hope and his feet knew both the sports field and the soft ground by the garden beds. He didn't know what all his talents were yet, but he knew how to look for them. He knew how to practice in 10-minute slices and how to tie a knot that was really a promise and how to coax a frightened bird with sesame and silence. He knew how to listen to rain for its many voices and to tap a bottle until it rang true. Thank you, he whispered, to the night, to the spoon, to the kitchen with the blue-flowered pot, to the boy in him who kept stirring even when the world was loud. He felt small and safe, at the same time like a note that fit perfectly into a song. The next morning, the beans wore small flags of leaves. Kabir leaned in and said, "Hello," because he meant to be the kind of person who always greeted green things. He laced his shoes and tied his knots. He washed his bowl and wiped the counter because discipline was a way of saying thank you to your future self. He picked up his sketchbook and drew a spoon standing in a cup like a mast on a ship, little stars floating up like bubbles. It was a simple drawing, but it looked like a promise. He signed his name underneath with a steady hand. On the walk to school, Mira joined him, pointing with a paint-stained finger at a cloud shaped like a whale. Do you hear it? She asked. Kabir listened. Somewhere, a worker hammered in a rhythm that made the air feel organized. A bicycle bell chimed twice as if laughing at a joke only bells understand. Kite fluttered and its tail whispered. He nodded. I hear lots of things, he said. Good, Mira replied. Tell me when the rain starts. My paint likes to dance in it. She skipped ahead, and Kabir followed, feeling like a boy who was learning the steps to a song the town already knew. Days unspooled and wound themselves around his efforts. He learned to ask for help without hearing failure echo behind it. He learned to help without making others feel small. When he stumbled, he didn't call it proof that he was hopeless. He called it a stone he'd step over tomorrow. Some days were still heavy, but he knew where he'd put his spoon. Sometimes, when he felt that old gray blanket try to tug itself over his head, he would close his eyes and remember the spoon dipping to the bottom of the cup. He would remember the little boy at the fair asking how to make homework sing. He would hear Dad say, "Effort is a spoon." And Mom say, "The sugar is you," and the wind chime would tinkle and he would lift his arms from his sides and begin again. As winter breathed around the edges of the town and the river's ribbon wore a quiet shine, Kabir discovered that he had a talent for listening into things until they told him their shape. He could hear when a friend's laugh had an ache under it and sit beside them without needing to fix anything. He could hear when a plan needed a slower path and say, "What if we go this way?" He could even hear when he needed rest and take it, because a good stirrer knows when to turn the flame down. And he started humming. He hummed when tying knots, when planting, when washing dishes. Little songs came, then bigger ones. One evening, he brought the glass bottle xylophone into the living room and, with Mom stirring soup in the kitchen and Dad sanding a frame in the workshop, played the sound of rain deciding to fall. The house listened, then nodded in approval. Late on a Sunday, cuddled under a blanket that smelled like the sun, Kabir asked Mom a question. "Do you think sweetness ever runs out?" Mom pretended to think, eyes on the ceiling as if the answers were written there. "I think sweetness is like the river," she said at last. "It flows when the snow on the mountains melts and when rains come and when springs whisper underground. We can fetch it with our cups, but we can't own it. We can help it flow by clearing the pebbles and stirring the eddies, by sharing it when we have more than we need. When we do that, we find that sweetness makes more sweetness." Kabir put his head on her lap and closed his eyes. He dreamt of cups, not just his but hundreds, thousands, being stirred by small, brave hands. He dreamt of a sky that tasted like sugar when you tried, and of rivers ribbony with light. He slept the best sleep, soft and steady, the kind that grows you a little in the night. In the morning, he woke to Dad at the stove and the blue-flowered pot steaming politely. Dad set a cup before him and didn't say a word. Kabir laughed, dipped his spoon to the bottom and stirred. Moral: even when life tastes bland, sweetness may wait at the bottom. Effort is the spoon that brings it forth. Our talents are often quiet until we practice with patience, honesty, and kindness. Keep trying in small, steady ways, ask for help when you need it, and help others when you can. When you stir your days with courage and care, your own hidden sweetness rises and makes the world sweeter too.